The Los Angeles Rams, their offseason in 60 seconds, lost Raheem Morris and Zach Robinson to the Falcons, promoted Chris Shula to be their defensive coordinator. Dave Ragone comes over from Atlanta to be their quarterback coach. Kevin Dotson, 3 years, $48 million extension after coming over at this time last year, essentially on a trade for relatively nothing. Brought in Jonah Jackson free agency. Colby Parkinson, Darius Williams, Cam Curl, Trey White on a short 1-year deal. Lost Jordan Fuller and Coleman Shelton in free agency on smaller deals to the Panthers and Bears. Drafted Jared Verse in the first round, Braden Fisk in the second round, Blake Corum and Cameron Kinchins in the third round. Blue chip check-in for the Los Angeles Rams. How many did you have?
3. Stafford is, I'm going to talk about him later. Incredible player. Puka Nacua pretty quickly got into that category. I've been a little bit hesitant to immediately put guys who were just rookies, but I think Nacua is specifically in this offense is in that tier.
It's
and
the
then,
Debo thing. It's like maybe in another offense he wouldn't get there. For this offense, he gets there.
Right. Maybe if he's, I don't know, with the Raiders or just some other middling offense, like even Seattle, like maybe he doesn't get there. But specifically here, yeah, we can put him in there. And then Cooper Kupp, again, last year wasn't his best year, but body of work. I'm going to give it to him and hope that he can have a little bit of a bounce back.
Yeah, those are the 3 that I had as well. I think on the second line down, again, like Kevin Dotson was really good for this team this year, deserving of that sort of contract. Kyron Williams was an excellent player for this team last year. And we'll see what happens with Kobe Turner. I put him in like the ascending camp more than anything else, but that's kind of how I had it tiered out with the bigger names on their roster.
Yeah, I think Turner's a great shout out. Like, wouldn't want to throw him into blue chip yet, but there's a chance he can get there. Dude's just so explosive.
Some very cool flashes. Like the way he plays and just the way he moves, he's somebody I'm very excited to watch in year 2, which we'll get to here in a second. What significant question marks does this depth chart have for you?
They just traded away their best linebacker in a linebacker group that was not very good to begin with. So I would say that that's a big problem. And linebacker, truthfully, has been a concern for this defense for a long time.
Here's what we have to acknowledge. This is a feature, not a bug. They do this on purpose. And whether that should happen, you can take issue with. But this team trading away Ernest Jones is not an accident. It's not an accident that it got to that place with Ernest Jones and they hadn't discussed an extension with him. They do not value off-ball linebackers the way that most teams in the NFL do, even in an era where they're depressed. So it's not coincidental that we've arrived in this place, even if it comes with significant downside risk.
There's so much I love about the Rams and their philosophy to everything. This is the one thing I will never be able to get behind with them.
Of course not. You're the last person in America who can get behind that.
Like you need somebody back there to do something for you. So that's part of the roster being a hole for just forever is it bugs me.
They clearly feel pretty good about Omar Spates, who was a college free agent for them, who come in and potentially play one of those spots. Like I don't think they would have done that without him flashing a little bit in camp based on, some of the things that I had seen and some of the things that I had read. But I'm just curious why the need to move on from Ernest Jones. It's not like you got a haul for him. You got a late round pick swap. So is it just something where we'll take anything because we know we're not going to extend him? If you have aspirations to be a playoff team and potentially like make some noise this year, is that pick swap more valuable to you than having him as a rental for the rest of the season? This is a genuine question. Like, I don't know the answer or why they would do this. It was just a little bit curious to me.
No, that's why it's confusing to me too. This is a team that if a lot of things go right and they can get their defense to take a little bit of a step up, they can go to like the NFC title game and really give themselves a chance.
Exactly.
So I would rather have a player like Ernest Jones as opposed to, a day 3 pick that they're going to get next year. And like, it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me.
Yeah, this team is good enough in my mind in a lot of areas to have like real playoff aspirations, and this doesn't square with that. So I was just a little bit confused about what the thought process was there. In terms of holes, I think that's exactly right. That's the first place my list started. I think you can talk about the secondary. I mean, like this is the idea of the secondary works for me, but like John Johnson is somebody who was bouncing around the league and is now penciled as a starter. We'll see how fast Kinchin comes along. Trey White is obviously going to start the year hurt. So like Kobe Durant is going to be in there. I think by the end of the season, they can probably piece it together. There's a little bit more like wish casting as part of that process than I think that some Rams fans would probably like to admit at this point.
I think that's fair. And I think this too, again, we've talked about this with a few defenses. There is a chance this secondary by the end of the season feels a little bit too slow. Trey White is not in his prime anymore. Yeah, like Cam Curl, for as much as I loved him, just running sideline to sideline is not necessarily his strength. So we could get to a spot where it just feels a little slow.
How old is Darius Williams now?
I don't know. He's been in the league for a good bit at this point.
He's 31.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
When a lot of your corners are 30 plus, not a
So
great spot to be.
he's 31, and Trey White is only 29, but that guy's got a lot of mileage on his body.
Exactly.
He is an old 29 when you consider some of the injuries he's had to deal with. So definitely something to keep in mind. I think that it could work out, if they get a couple of nice breaks, but something to think about as we consider the roster as a whole. What do you watch in the first month of the season with these Los Angeles Rams?
It's similar to what I said about Kyle Shanahan. I just want to see what is the next thing for Sean McVay because kind of in the same vein, he's been a guy who's always been willing to change his offense. For the early parts of the Goff era, they were kind of just doing the same stuff, but then when that started to fall away, he really started to try to hit different levers with okay, we're going to go more 12 personnel and we're going to try to change up the run game and he was hitting all these different buttons and none of them quite worked and then he said, "All right, screw it. I'm going to trade for a different quarterback who can philosophically let me change my offense." And then they really leaned into more like gun drop back passing. We're going to be really aggressive down the field with our drop back stuff. We don't necessarily need the play action. And then along with that too, he really started to lean into the gap scheme run stuff with the duo and some of the counter stuff that they do. So he's just always been a guy who's willing to look forward. And I just kind of want to see what the next step is for him because again, he's always proven that he can do it.
Similar to the Pearsall conversation or similar to the Shanahan conversation. What do you think that may look like?
I'm gonna guess it's gonna be a little bit more pistol because they were already one of the heavier pistol teams in the league last year, and I think
Not a little more.
I mean, I would like to see it though because I think it's not like Peyton Manning where he got into the pistol more, but it kind of is because Stafford isn't the most mobile guy anymore. He's probably more mobile than he was 2 years ago and more than he seems, but he's not going to be doing a ton of running for you. So if you can get him to a spot where you can marry your under center game by being in the pistol, but also ease the mobility stuff off of Stafford by being in the gun, it's the perfect marriage.
Yeah, you get some of your downhill running game stuff. You have less tells in terms of protection, and you can activate your quick game. You can activate some of that stuff not under center in a way that would have been a little bit more difficult in previous worlds. So I think they'll absolutely be using a ton more of that stuff. Curious what the other wrinkles look like because they do have tight ends that they're excited about. I had a really good conversation with Nick Caley, their tight ends coach during training camp, who I think is like an ascending coach in the NFL. And we're just talking about some of the pieces that he has. And they brought in Kobe Parkinson, who I think is a really nice player. I mean, he was obviously the third tight end in Seattle, but he's somebody who has a really varied skill set. Davis Allen, I think, gave them a decent amount as a receiver last year. Like, he's intriguing to me, but this is a team that wants to live in 11. So there's the push and the pull of we have guys we want to get on the field, but we have schematic advantages when we decide to play in 11. So trying to figure out the trade-offs there, I think that's going to be a process for them. Unrelated to that, I was talking to another coach on their offensive staff, and he said something that I thought was very incisive about how you think about innovation and the menu for yourself as an offense. And he said they're in one of their meetings this offseason, their offensive line coach was saying, there's a reason that Chipotle is successful. Like, they only have 5 things on the menu. You don't need to step outside of that when you have a model that works for you. Just get really, really good at the 5 things you have on your menu and have 100 different things that you can sprinkle on top of it. And I think that's kind of what this offense is. Like, the menu of shit is actually kind of small when you actually drill down into it. It's just all of the different ways that they get to it that actually makes it special.
Exactly. They'll run the same run 3 or 4 times on a drive if they have to. It's just the motion will be different. One guy will be aligned in a little bit of a different way. They're getting to the same shit all the time. It's just a matter of they have 8 different ways to get to it, which again, it's one of those things where you kind of always talk about this on offense. Like, what is the best way that we can make this simpler and easier for us, but really difficult for the defense to hone in on? And it's doing that where you have just a handful of concepts you drill, you just get to it in 8 different ways. And now it's hard for defenses to pinpoint how you're getting there.
Yeah, and this team does that better than anybody. I mean, the idea of the illusion of complexity is like the first time I ever heard that is Sean McVay saying it. And now it's obviously something that's all around the league, and it's a Shanahan thing, but this team does it better or as well as any team in the NFL. What I'm watching the first month of the season, what do we get out of this defensive front? You remove Aaron Donald, who's one of the greatest defensive players of all time. I think from a body of work perspective, the best defensive player that I've ever seen since I started covering the NFL. We can have a debate about peak JJ Watt versus peak Aaron Donald and what that means, but we're splitting hairs.
That's
Aaron
for
Donald
another
is,
show, maybe.
yeah, Aaron Donald is one of the greatest players I've ever seen in any era, in any capacity. You remove him from the equation, you have a lot of young guys. They draft Jared Verse in the first round. They bring in Braden Fisk and pay a lot to do it in the second round and pair those guys together. You have Byron Young in his second year as an outside guy. Again, we talked about Kobe Turner. Bobby Brown is a player that they like at that nose tackle spot. So what does that young group look like? What is the deployment? And what sort of feel does that position group have over the course of the season? Because we talk about some of the concerns and how it's going to fit together in the back end. If this front can feel dynamic and feel like a problem by the end of the year because they're allowed to grow together, what does that ultimately mean for this defense?
Do you think they're going to at all try to slot somebody into what they were doing with Aaron Donald, or is this just going to look like it's a
I
completely
don't think
different Rams
so.
defense?
I don't think so. I don't think that there's going to be a guy that they try to build the pass rush around, because I don't think that they have somebody like, clearly this is the best answer. This is the guy we want getting the one-on-one over and over and over again, like it was with Donald. I think it's just about combining a bunch of styles and bringing Jared Verse into this, where you have like a true power player. And obviously Fisk is kind of the same way. And Donald had played with power, but I think doubling down on that and just making this group overall feel a little bit different than it has over the last couple of years, that felt like a conscious choice that they were making. And one of the most interesting transitions from Raheem Morris to Shula is that Raheem Morris is a DB guy. He always was. Shula believes like this thing starts with the front. Like this is the focus. This is what I care the most about. So I'm really excited to see what ideas that sort of priority shift ultimately lends to.
I like hearing that. Defense does start with hitting people. So I'm kind of I'm bought in on the defensive coordinator already.
I am, and we'll talk about this. Is not my answer for what I'm most excited about. I'm pumped about watching Jared Verse play football in the NFL. Like that
You
dude is
love
an
him, yeah.
as an ass kicker. I just am excited about, like we talk about with the DNA changers, man. Like, what does a guy like that do for you? And we were there for 2 days at camp, and how many times people were like noticing things that he was doing, and how many times the other players on defense were reacting to what he was doing, even like guys on the sideline. That stuff that you notice. It's like guys feed off of the way that he plays, and clearly the amount of shit that he talks, which has been absurd apparently all throughout training camp. So what that guy means for a young defense, I'm just excited to see what that means.
That's actually a perfect player archetype. Guy who talks shit and also is strong enough to just drive you into the dirt if he wants to. It's tough to say anything back to a guy who can play against you that way.
Big fan of that. What is keeping you up at night as you think about this Rams team?
This is a fragile roster. Like they are a glass cannon type of offense here. Like they already have had guys who are getting banged up a little bit. Jonah Jackson has been banged up a little bit. Puka Nakua has been banged up a little bit this offseason. Stafford has been, I think, fine, but is always liable to get hurt as an older quarterback. Cup is older and he's kind of coming off of a season where he's not been fully healthy. Tyler Higbee is on the PUP list right now. Like this is just the running backs, by the way, are small. Like there's just a lot where this offense, it's not hard. It wouldn't be fluky if 3 or 4 of them got hurt over the course of the season. It's just like
No.
that's who these guys are. And so you're really trying to get through a fine needle by hoping all of these guys play at least 14 games.
And this would be true if they were all healthy right now.
Today,
And if they
exactly.
hadn't been dealing with some of the stuff throughout training camp. I mean, these are some of the things that we're dealing with right now if you're the Rams. Alaric Jackson, their left tackle, is suspended for the first 2 games of the year. Okay. Rob Havenstein is currently hurt, their right tackle. He may not be ready for week 1. Jonah Jackson missed a chunk of training camp, and Jordan Rodriguez reported yesterday that it sounds like they think Jonah Jackson is actually their best center and that they're going to move Avila back to guard. And I'm like, guys, I don't know.
It's a
It's
little
August
late
30th.
for that.
It's August 30th. Do we feel okay about that? So I'm worried about some of that stuff. And then Puka missed a chunk of training camp with the knee issue. He had trouble staying healthy in college. Cup has looked healthy, but the last couple of years don't fill you with optimism. And Stafford is liable to be hurt at any time. So that part of it definitely worries me. And that's exactly what my answer is. Like, the upside case for this offense is awesome. Like, this offense has a chance to be one of the best offenses in the league, but fragile is a good way to put it. Like, the downside is, I think, more apparent and more possible then we probably want to believe as people who are optimistic about the best case scenario for this offense.
That's why it's honestly hard too to like even pinpoint what the middle ground looks like because it either feels like they're going to be mostly healthy and be a top five powerhouse offense, or you pull out two or three of the Jenga blocks and it's like, oh shit, everybody's hurt. And now they're just a middling offense. It's so hard to find what the actual middle ground would be when the whole thing is like, are they just going to stay healthy?
All right, so here, let me play devil's advocate a little bit. Offensive line injuries, that's something that may be maybe hard to overcome. They do have some depth there, right? Like Joe Newcomb is still on this roster. They have guys that, have been slated to be starters in previous iterations of this offense that are now depth pieces. So hopefully they can overcome some of those if they have to deal with it. They drafted Blake Corum to be a one-to-one replacement for Kyron Williams if he were to get hurt, right? And so I think that idea of having a little bit more depth there, protecting yourself. They were one of the best offenses in the league last year when Cooper Kupp was playing at like 65% for most of the year. So they have shown an ability, and I think that they've tried to build the roster to account for some of this stuff. So even if they do get a couple unlucky breaks, can they still come out on the other side okay if Stafford is one of those guys that stays healthy throughout the year?
That's a good point because I guess even when this roster was significantly worse and maybe not as healthy a few years ago, like even the bad version of this offense was still like 19th in the league, basically. So that's a good point.
And even at quarterback, I know we don't love Jimmy Garoppolo. Jimmy Garoppolo is a better option than what this team has had at their backup quarterback spot for a while. I mean, Brett Rippon is fighting to be the third quarterback, or was fighting to be the third quarterback in Chicago. He was the starter for this team when Matthew Stafford got hurt last year. So having a guy in Jimmy who, you put him back in a pure progression offense, and he has shown an ability to keep a well-designed machine on the tracks when given the opportunity. Even that is a little bit better of a situation than they've dealt with over the last couple of years.
On the flip side, he is not going to start the year on the roster. So
Yeah, you would hope that he gets back by the time Stafford gets hurt, if it does eventually happen, even though I don't even want to put that into the universe. I just have no interest in exploring that timeline in any way. What are you most excited about with this Rams team? Speaking of Matthew Stafford.
yeah, speaking of Matthew Stafford, I hope he stays healthy, man. I've become fully entranced by the Matthew Stafford experience. You know, I could start to feel myself getting there at the very end of the Detroit saga, or really like the Darrell Bevel years, like when it was like,
That
okay,
was
they're
it.
running,
That was the
yeah,
moment.
they're running a real offense now, and like he looks like a real quarterback. He's mature. This looks awesome. And then you get him to the Rams, and it's like, dude, this guy, he won the Super Bowl. And then to me, obviously, like 2022 statistically, he was not that great, but he played at a really high level. And then 2023, man, some of just what he's doing is he's gotten to this point where there's just like a brazenness to his game that you can only get to by having a number one overall pick arm and just slinging it everywhere for 10 plus years and being a guy who's willing to take hits. Like, because of the way that he's played, it's almost allowed him to like keep evolving this way that he's played. And he's to a point where every single blade of grass is available to him. And he's actually willing to make those throws all of the time from the pocket. It's just, nobody quite plays like him, and it's really cool to watch.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I'm curious what you think the layers of that feel like and what the layers of that are in terms of why nobody plays like him. My hypothesis and kind of what I would kind of push forward there is that he's a guy who it's all come together for him in multiple different ways. Mentally, he is extremely advanced, like extremely advanced. I've talked to multiple coaches this summer about just like some of the things that Stafford can do. One, they can give him like 4 plays in the huddle. So the flexibility this offense has at the line of scrimmage where, they're doing a motion and then there's an alert off the motion, but then they're choosing between 2 plays and they go from under center to the gun. Like the flexibility they have before the play because of him is insane. 2, his ability to understand a certain defender's role within a coverage structure and how to manipulate that defender and move that player is, I think a lot of quarterback traits evolve because they need to, right? That's like a matter of evolution. In order to survive, you have to do this. Matthew Stafford's talent would allow him to be a very good quarterback without some of the mental acumen that he has. It is not like a necessity to play the way that he wants to play, but he has still developed it. So you combine that with the physical talent and then this just fuck you attitude where it's like, I won a Super Bowl. I've made like $250 million. There is no reason for me to play with any sort of fear or inhibition ever again. So you check like all of those boxes one after the other, and this is the final product on the other end. And it is simply one of the best quarterbacks and best players in the NFL, full stop.
That's perfect. To me, what encapsulates it all is there was a play last year against the Rams. And listen, every single person who talks about this sport, that Rams Ravens game, or against the Ravens, I mean, that Rams Ravens game, one of the best football games like I've ever seen. Just the coolest stuff, man. Like both teams throwing haymakers. But there's a play where the Rams run a seam route and Matthew Stafford, and keep in mind, if you're running a seam route, who is covering this? It's going to be Roquan Smith playing the middle. But Matthew Stafford gets to the very top of his drop, no wasted time, instantly transitions into throwing, like pins the ball, a seam ball on the back shoulder of his players, like on the back shoulder, away from Roquan Smith, literally gets it like inches outside of Roquan Smith's wingspan. For Stafford to have the confidence to beat a player like that, to have the arm strength to do it, to put it in the perfect spot, to have the perfect timing to do it, it's just like I said, you have to play a certain way and have a certain level of talent for a decade to get there and make that play, and he's got it.
This feeds into what I'm most excited about is just the offense, period, right? And him playing at this level, I think, is a huge reason for that. But I also just think that this has clicked into place. Like they found the formula they want to play with. And I think that Stafford is a huge part of that. But I think Puka also unlocks that. Like getting back to that third piece in 11 personnel, being somebody that you can use as a de facto tight end and taking some of that off of Cooper Kupp's plate as he gets a little bit deeper in his career, it all fell into place. Like it all clicked. They now can play the way they want to, throwing the ball in the drop back game like they did in 21 when they won the Super Bowl. And now because of the way their offensive line is built and because of the running back that they have, the run game has finally fallen into place. Like this is a complete offense for the first time, I think you could say ever, in the Sean McVay era, because even in 17, it was so much manufactured stuff in the passing game, right? It was all play action. It was all these screens. This, they have the play action game. They have the drop back game. They have a downhill running game. They have the perimeter complements off of the running game. This is the most complete, least vulnerable build of a Sean McVay offense that we have ever seen. And I am very, very excited to see what the second iteration of that looks like.
Because even the Super Bowl run, they were kind of just putting a lot of eggs in the, all right, Matthew Stafford, we're going to go into
They could
empty.
not run the ball.
They
They
were
could not run the ball when they won the Super Bowl.
Yes, they were a bad rushing team. It was literally just Stafford being on the most insane heater, throwing 20-yard balls out of empty. Like, that's how they won the Super Bowl. And, like, yeah, when your quarterback's playing at that level, you can do that. But like you said, this is the most where it just feels like there's no real weakness, and they can lean on everything if they really need to.
And if they stay healthy. If they stay
Right.
healthy, I do think that sort of offense is on the table again. And even Sean, I want to be clear about this. After the Kyren Williams panic this week with the punt return stuff, Sean McVay loves Kyren Williams. Like loves Kyren Williams. They drafted Blake Corum, not I think to eat into Kyren Williams's workload. They drafted Blake Corum because I don't think Sean McVay can face life without a Blake Corum type within this offense. So the idea of him getting hurt and having to remove him from the equation, I think was just too much for them to bear. So they decided to go out and get someone they thought could replicate Blake Corum if it came to that. So I want to be clear about that and just the ways that I think Sean McVay has talked about Blake Corum and the ways that he has unlocked, about Kyren Williams and the ways that he has unlocked this offense in a week where I think that there was some questions about Kyren Williams' overall value to this team.
That's the funniest way to put it, is that Sean McVay has been one of the smartest offensive minds in football forever, but this is his thing that is causing him the most panic is if I don't have this particular running back who is this way, I'm going to lose my mind.
Yes, and they spent a third round pick in order to account for that. I understand that's a lot of draft capital, but I do think that was the motivation. Most important supporting character in your mind on the Los Angeles Rams for this season?
Both of the linebackers, Christian Rosebloom, Omar Speights, who you mentioned earlier. I know they probably like these guys if they were willing to trade away Ernest Jones, but I'm not so bought in here. So I would like to see them give me something. And then Alaric Jackson playing.
Just to be clear before we move on, it's Christian Rose Boom,
Oh,
not
really?
Christian Rose Bloom. The fact that
Something
you
Rose
think it
Bloom
might
makes
have
more
been,
sense in my
it
head.
does make more sense, but the fact that that's where we are and we're not exactly sure what his name is, he did play a decent amount last year, but that's the state of the Los Angeles Rams linebacker room, I think, right now.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm gonna leave it at that. And then left tackle, Alaric Jackson, actually a really good run blocker and a guy who can definitely
Awesome
move
run blocker.
people. Which, if you're gonna be the counter duo power team, sure, that's great. But it would be nice to see him take a little bit step forward as a pass protector.
Yes, and that spot in general, as I think about like the 2-year plan for this team, he's hitting free agency this offseason. So what they're going to do at left tackle over the next calendar year, something to keep an eye on. For me, it's pick a guy in the secondary. John Johnson, Cam Curl, Kobe Durant, Darius Williams. Like, can this unit as a whole give this defense enough of a floor with the potential upside up front where you can be a average defense or slightly below average defense, right? Like they were the 23rd, they were 23rd in defensive DVOA last year. Can you arrive somewhere close to that with more sturdiness on the back end and that injection of youth up front, even without Aaron Donald? If this is the 22nd ranked defense in the league or the 20th ranked defense in the league, and the offense does stay healthy, this is a playoff team. And this is a team that could like win a playoff game. So I think that the secondary for me probably determines the floor, and I think the front determines the ceiling. What counts as a successful season in your mind for the Los Angeles Rams?
I think success would mean that the defense does kind of get to average and the offense stays healthy, which to me, that should be a team that can get to the divisional round. I think if you have the firepower that they have on offense, that's a team that can win, potentially their wild card round. I guess depending on who they draw. If they draw like the Lions, it's going to be really hard. But in theory, I think this is a
They
team that can
almost
do
beat
it.
the Lions last year. I was
Exactly.
there.
Yeah, they were right there. Like exactly, one or two things go different, and they win that game. And then I would say just let the defense feel like at the end of the year they've got enough where they can add one or two pieces and be like, all right, 2025, we have a really good chance to give Matthew Stafford one big go at this, at the end.
It's really funny because we don't talk about these before we put them in. And this is very, very similar. I essentially said the playoffs, they make the playoffs. The offense is elite, right? Like that has to be part of this for success. And you get to a place, I'll read it verbatim. You get to a place where we're saying, okay, this team has some cap space next year. The defense has ascending pieces. Can we make one more run at this thing in 2025 with Matthew Stafford and Cooper Kupp for one last ride? That's it. So we're on the exact same page in terms of how we want to feel about this team by the end of the year if we're going to consider this a success.
I think with as much as we both love Matthew Stafford, that's where we want to be. Give him one last chance to go do it again.
That's probably it. That's probably what's fueling this.